Welcome to the Oz Comic Show. We're back after a bit of a break, and today, first thing I want to talk about is Drink and Draw. This week is Speedball and his other character he became later after Civil War, Penance. So you can draw either, you can draw both, up to you, whatever. And the only other thing we have running until Christmas is this show and recent reads on Mondays. So, yeah, tune into those on the same channel. But that's about all I've got to say. So I think it's time that we jump into the intro and talk to Aidan.
Welcome, Aidan. Thank you so much for being on tonight's show. I'm pretty sure it has been just over a year since I first met you. So thank you for being on tonight.
Oh, look, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and nice to see you again, Sheydin and Shane. I think we've run into each other at some of the cons, haven't we? Or
Yes.
is that just in my dreams?
No, we did run into each other once. I was running around
and we
World North. Yeah.
And plus the chinwag with Lee Chalker as well. That's where we last met online. Anyway, lovely to see you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Not a problem at all. I have been so excited for this interview ever since I was given the opportunity to read Dead City Lullabies at the CAA last year. So my list of questions have just grown ever since, to be quite honest with you. So I'm ready to dive in, if you are.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's go.
We'll start with some intro questions. For those who don't know you, can you give us a little bit of an introduction of what you do and what Dead City Lullabies is all about?
Yes, elevator pitch. So I'm an illustrator and writer, obviously. I created Dead City Lullabies, which we'll go into more. I have a day job, but I've also spent many years in the music industry. I'm a musician. In rock and roll, in theatre, in various other projects, and it was during one of those things I was doing a production of King Lear. This is 17 years ago now, and I came up with the idea for this thing sitting on a train, staring at Sydney Harbour and imagining it with no boats and no cars and no people. And just got this sort of flash of an idea for a setting for like a lone character's tale. And that's sort of the seed of where it began. It developed all these years. And finally, it's now the book that you've read, well, the first part thereof. And it's going to expand from there. It's my passion project. It's the thing I've been thinking about nonstop for the longest time of anything in my career. And yeah, it's very exciting that people are now responding to it. It's when you've got something like that just seems to only exist in your mind or your like wishes and your dreams, and finally it starts to take shape. It's really exciting, really gratifying, and so I can't wait to share more of it and talk about it all tonight.
Absolutely. Having read this book amongst 100 plus entries last year,
wow.
What struck me the most was your art style. It is so detailed, and it is the level of like continuity throughout. Like it's just breathtaking. Like it really, really stood out to me.
Thank you, mate.
As you can see, it is scrolling next to us here, and you can see some sneak peeks of some of the pages and just how beautiful they really are. I really want to hear, in your words, how you would describe your own style.
Well, I've been drawing since I was a kid, and the things I drew as a kid, like back in the 80s, were I wanted to draw dinosaurs and I wanted to draw spaceships and, and things from the big movies that affected me as a kid, which were Star Wars, Aliens, which I saw way too young, but that whole sort of used space thing that seemed so greasy and real, and Blade Runner, when I finally saw that, was a massive influence, and I wanted to sort of try and create things on paper that felt like it was real but completely of another universe, if you will. And also, growing up, I drew a lot of very, very extremely silly comics in high school. I won't share any of those here, but privately I could. And so I sort of like danced about with like what I wanted to do as a person who draws for so many years, until I started to get into graphic novels, probably in my 20s. And I was like, wow, you can tell a really cinematic story with pictures and words. And some of the stuff that was, I mean, I'd always read comics as a kid, but some of the things I read as a young adult, probably the first thing that comes to mind is From Hell,
Oh, yes.
uh, the graphic novel about the Jack the Ripper murders. That I thought, wow, what a way to take a tale onto the page visually that is just so all encompassing. I want to do that. I want to do that, and that's always been the goal. But it's just been a matter of chipping away over the years to get better at however I wanted to tell stories. And then finally, I had a story that was mine, that wasn't connected to anything else, that I could use as the sort of drawing board, if you will, for that. And so I've spent all this time, all these years, just trying to get better, trying to get what I think is good enough to illustrate the story that's in my head. And that involved, doing a lot of study of other artists and doing actual study of anatomy and fundamental drawing skills. And I developed this style, I think, that is kind of very organic and very, how do I put it? Like I'm not too afraid of making marks. So there's some, like, if you look closely in Dead City Lullabies, there's stray marks and things that are sort of a bit overdrawn, and suggestions of other things, but it all sort of adds up to make your eye believe in what you're reading without questioning it. And I think that's you mentioned it's so detailed. That's because I can't leave something alone. I read a lot of amazing comic books where there'll be some really strong detail in the focal points, but everything else is just a mere suggestion. But I can't stop there. I have to keep chipping away at it. And then, of course, this one is full color too. So I use color and layers as like a cinematic tool, I guess.
Mhm.
So it takes a long time to do, but it comes out beautifully. It almost looks like a movie. I'm very happy with it. And
Should
other
be.
people have had a lot of kind things to say about it. So it's cool. It's becoming a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was a long answer to how would I describe my style, but yeah.
No, I think
Gorgeous,
that
Bradley. Stunning.
worded it beautifully. I guess you touched on a few points where I really want to like kind of explore. You talked about some of the artists that you kind of like looked at. When I first read Dead City Lullabies, I couldn't help but look at your mech designs, your really detailed like spaceships that are like kind of like sprinkled throughout this particular volume of your book. I can't help
Yeah,
but
there's not a lot of it in there, but yeah.
I can't help but ask. Do you know of any artists by the name of Carlo Aureliano or Darren Quash by any chance? Because your mech designs
I have heard those names, but I can't connect them
oh,
to drawings in my mind. I'll have to Instagram them.
no way, because you have like hit the nail on the head, and I just couldn't help but think, wow, he must have like studied Darren and Carlo's work because it's just so well done. And it kind of brings me back to my days when I studied at a place called CDW Studios that did concept design for films and games. And this stuff just really kind of echoed those two artists, which was a real credit to your drawing skills. So
Well, thank you. That's really interesting because um, uh, a lot of what informs my designs are the great concept artists. The ones who immediately pop to
yeah,
mind are they're all they're all men, but Ron Cobb, Sid Mead, Ralph McQuarrie, all the people that were attached to those big properties I was telling you about earlier, the
yeah,
movie properties. So I studied all. I used when DVDs came around, and there was all the DVD extras, which aren't really a thing anymore, sadly. And there were all these. I would relish the opportunity to look at all the concept drawings and watch the artists like go through the various iterations of how they
yeah,
arrived at the Sulaco in Aliens or whatever. Um, and that's where I sort of learned how things fit together before they're built for a movie. And so in designing the ships and stuff for this, there's not a lot in this first volume, but there will be more. I mean, you can see. I don't know if you can see in the pages that Shane's chosen, but there's a kind of like a dead mech in the bottom of that canyon that is bipedal. So it's sort of, if it were working, it would look like a dinosaur.
okay,
And a little bit like the walkers in The Empire Strikes Back in the Hoth
oh,
battle. That kind of militaristic, sort of practical. There's no like flourish to the design, but by their nature, they look like a creature of some kind. I've always liked that sort of something that feels alive, even though it's a machine, and it's
yeah,
got bits hanging off it and stuff. That's sort of, I guess, yeah, what informs most of my designs. And if it's a little bit scratchy and rough and got bits missing, all the better because it will feel more real.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's those, like you said, you have those stray lines that you were talking about prior. I think it just adds more layers to your drawings. It really kind of um, showcases where you started, and then all the colors and all the the top layers and details and whatnot really kind of just like seal the deal, really. And I think
Well,
it's
let me
that
show
kind of
you something.
the layering of the details is just phenomenal.
That's very kind. So let me show you an example. In the pages that you're seeing flipping over, you'll probably see this. Let's try and get it straight. There we go. Which is just like, I'm not going to tell you the character's name because that's a spoiler alert, but the guy who's sitting in that house, like on the cliff, uh,
Yes.
and you'll see that's all the drawing was on paper. But you'll see then all this space I've left. I was like, well, I can do the rest in Procreate.
Yep.
Um, and what you're seeing with those colors is a combination of, digital illustration, but also like pictures of the sky that I've taken, or a watercolor texture I've made and scanned and like combined and made um, inverted the colors or whatever.
Yep.
And so I find all these like color palettes just from sifting through my own stuff. So I haven't thankfully stolen anything, but
I think
it's a way
yeah.
of like taking a black and white drawing and just making it leap out.
Yeah.
And what's the guy? The guy that made me want to go hell for leather with a color is a guy named Matt Rhodes. I don't know if you're familiar with his work,
I've
but
heard the
his
name.
use
Yeah.
of color in his projects is just, look him up,
Wow.
Matt Rhodes.
I will.
And
Yes.
yeah,
Same.
I think yeah. There's just so many elements that you kind of laid in, and I think that in itself tells a story as an artist, I guess. And just kind of again just leaves a lot of layering for your story to be built on, which I thought was really really interesting, especially coming from a conceptual drawing background. It was really refreshing to see that level of detail within a comic.
Cool.
Well,
thank you.
You did touch on colors as well, and everyone who knows me knows that I'm a color girly. I really want to know why you chose these specific colors, because it seems like it's a real driver in this story. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, if you look at the book, I have a copy here. It starts. Let's get past the prologue, which, but it starts. You know, that's nighttime, and then dawn,
Yeah.
and it's dawn in a desert. So I thought, well, what does dawn in the desert look like? What are those colors? That's my favorite color scheme, which is that salmon orange of the sun coming up behind the horizon, and the sky still that kind of violet color. So
Cool.
you'll see that color scheme right throughout my stuff, because I just think it's so gorgeous. When I see it in the morning, look, I wake up at 5 a.m. I've got a 3-year-old. I look outside and I go, man, that is beautiful. That's like life. But of course, she goes into a very deep place in the desert that the sun doesn't touch until maybe the very middle of the day. So I thought, well, that would still look like pre-dawn. So it would be very, very blue and grey. And so most of the time you spend in this first part of the book is that, except for this vision in the middle, which if you've read it, is something else. But yeah, so those sorts of those bluey grey colours, those slightly washed out. I don't use a lot of black in my inking. I don't do big blocks of black. I let the sort of, well, in this book, I let the colour sort of do that work, which is a lot more time consuming and can go wrong and takes a lot of trial and error. But I think it looks right for part one, at least.
I think you've absolutely done it justice. That's for sure. You've really allowed it to breathe, if I can say. A lot of the panels just have, just so much going on, but at the same time, it's balanced really well in the regard that it's not overly crowded, in my opinion. Anyway, but I just think it's just really, really well done. And I guess kind of leading on from that, you mentioned before you showed us sketches, and then you also mentioned Procreate. I want to know a little bit of how you bounce between those two mediums, and if there is a favorite one that you prefer to work in.
Yeah. Well, I drew I guess you call it the pencils and inks in the comic world, but for this, it's just, I did the drawings originally in a ballpoint pen, a black ballpoint pen, just a cheap one, on really nice paper, sort of A2, A3 size. And I just wanted it to look like that could be the comic, that would work in black and white. And then it wouldn't matter. Like I've sort of, and that's why you see a lot of detail, because with the ballpoint pen, you can be very, very light and do a lot of cross hatching and stuff very gently and not screw up the drawing. And then you can really dig in and get those nice hard outlines and stuff. I love ballpoint pen.
Wow.
And then I thought from there, well, I'm going to have to make a color. I'm not going to risk brutalizing it with watercolor or something. I'll do it digitally. Photoshop is amazing, but it's not portable for me. So the only means that I could do it in the park at lunchtime or on the train or in bed was the iPad. And what's the go-to software on the iPad? That's Procreate. I know there's others, and I've toyed with all of them, but Procreate's the best one. There are things it doesn't do super, super well, like scaling. Forgive the tech speak, but it does this anti-aliasing, which makes it nice and soft when you scale something. But that can be a problem because you can get mismatched sort of line weights and fuzziness and stuff. So you have to just get the line work right before you go into Procreate, and then you can go hell for leather with colors and layers, and basically chop up all the black lines into foreground, midground, background, and each of those has a color layer behind it, and each of those has an atmosphere layer in front of it. If
Yep.
I want to go that far, so you can see there's a lot of mist and stuff that sort of comes in front, and it's magic for that. And I've got a lot of textures and brushes and stuff that I bought over the years. I got this huge scrolling collection in Procreate, so it's like my toolbox.
Yep.
And I know there is more powerful software out there, but it's the one that works for me. And I built this whole comic I even did the lettering in Procreate.
Oh, okay. Yep. Wow.
Yeah, so it's been, I've certainly put it through its paces, and I bought it for what, $8.99 10 years ago. Given me all. It's a very generous software package.
It is, isn't it? And I'm glad that you touched on your lettering, because I think in this particular volume, it's you know, there's a I think it's Alice who is the voice, or what would you?
The AI,
the
the ship's onboard AI, yeah.
Yeah, and the way that you've done how she kind of comes in and out as well. You know, the communication's a bit fuzzy.
Yeah, the signal breaking out. Yeah,
yeah,
I wasn't
really
so sure.
So well done. I think there was a lot of consideration done there, and I think it came through really, really well. And then even
I'm glad to hear that, because you got to find solutions, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can't just do a like bzzzt.
Yeah.
You know, dot dot dot. I thought I have to visually make it like we can't hear it.
And it's so well, like it's really clearly visually communicated that it is like coming out of, like, it's very glitchy, and I think you've done that really well. And then even like the change over to just the text as well. I thought you've done a really well. Yeah, you've communicated that really well, really clearly.
Yeah, where she says, "Thank you." Yeah, where she says, like, "I can't hear you" for Shumer, which is a Aryan swear word. Switch over to Unicode, which is actually a font name, but it's like understood.
Okay. No, I think that was a really I really like how you you handled your type or your lettering in Dead City Lullabies. I think it was really well. But yeah, I guess moving on from that, I really want to kind of delve into more of your process. You talked a little bit of your drawing process. I know that you were the sole creator of this project, and sometimes as creators, like the only creators on projects, when we do it solo, we have to wear many different hats. And I really want to kind of know, what was your process from start to finish to where it is today? How has that looked for you?
Yes. So I'm a bit of a because I dream up ideas for projects and I have skill sets in a few camps. I'm always thinking of how can I make that happen without needing to rely on other people, which is not the healthiest way to go about things in terms of getting projects off the ground. But I always think, can I do that? Can I do that by myself? And in the case of this, that involves writing it really well, which is very hard to do. There's about 15 drafts of the script for this volume. Finally, I got a good enough, and even then, I had to just shave a whole bunch out of it because it's like too much talk. Look at there's really beautiful pictures that do enough. So I had to keep it really sort of practical, the dialogue, and there's no exposition in it, except for those sort of bits of box text which are like a journal that someone could be reading. We don't know that yet. But aside from that, the clues to piecing the whole story together will lie in the pictures. And so the dialogue and stuff, it took so long to get that right. And so I'd drawn the whole thing, even when it wasn't the final draft, because I knew what needed to happen. And in a way, the action and the lack of informed the script. And and it all sort of it's this dance between the writing and the pictures, basically, that just took so long. But of course, while I was doing all that, I was imagining it like a layer further, and that is, what would it sound like? What would it feel like if it were a film or TV series or something? And so, me being me, I was like, well, let me write some music for it. So we ended up with this,
That's
which I can tell you
amazing.
about this. So it's kind of like there's a soundtrack to not to volume one of the book, but there's a soundtrack to the whole like thing, and that's what that record is. Um, and so it all just sort of eventually, it took years, but it eventually developed a kind of life of its own. Even though I have to do all the work, I feel like it's rolling now, so it more easily comes out of me. So
Yeah.
so volume two is coming, folks. It's I'm about I've drawn most of it, so then I've got to go through the whole. I've got it. Well, I've set myself up for like a big job with the color style and stuff. So I've got to do all that. I've got to do lettering.
Yeah.
So it'll take a little while, but it's getting there. So
Yeah.
I think there's going to be four of them to tell her story, but there's
Okay.
this much wider context as well that could become other stories if I
Wow.
live
Wow.
that long.
That's super exciting to know that number two is well and truly on its way.
Oh
I
yeah,
guess
going through it.
when I first read it, I was just like, I need to know what happens next because it ends on such a big cliffhanger. Um, and
Yeah.
I guess when I first read it, I'm not sure if I mentioned this before the show or not, or whether or not I mentioned it to Shane. I'm not sure. But when I first read it, the first thing that popped into my head, and I'm not sure if you intended this, was it gave the Lost City of Atlantis vibes.
Oh
Was that
yeah.
in like a conscious thing in your head when you wrote it, or
As in the myth of the lost city of
yeah,
Atlantis, or is there a
even
particular
the
film?
movie as
Yeah. Oh, I mean, those kinds of stories have always intoxicated me. Like
yeah,
when I was a kid, I had this book of myths and legends, and it was illustrated really beautifully. I'm sure I've still got it. Um, and there was maybe 4 pages on the lost city of Atlantis, actually. And I remember thinking, wow, I was 6. I was like, is that really there? God, I hope it's there. How could we ever find it? And of course, at the time, they'd found the Titanic at the bottom of the sea, and I was like, yeah, maybe they'll find Atlantis. So yeah, that whole thing of the lost the lost civilization that I guess
yeah,
archaeology is all about is really quite thrilling.
yeah,
Um, and a lot of people say, what does Dead City Lullabies mean? Aside from it sounding nice, um, I guess you could say it's like a lullaby is a song.
Oh,
Oh no, oh no, we've lost Aidan.
he
He
might
pops
pop
back.
back.
I'm hoping he
Hopefully,
does. Oh, I had so much to ask him, and that was one of my favorite questions too. We'll give him a
that was a
second
good
to
question. That was a good
really
answer
come
starting
back on,
there.
and I really wanted the answer too because this is
Are
something that
we,
I've. Oh,
Oh,
you're
there
are
we
we
back.
go.
back?
We lost you for a second.
Are we
I'm so
back?
glad you're back.
Okay.
I think we were talking about
What's
lost
what's the
civilizations.
bit my wife has started watching Netflix?
Oh no,
Yeah.
lost
So yeah, there
civilizations.
is.
Oh no.
Um, yeah. So um, there is something about the. Oh yeah, Dead City Lullabies. Um,
Yes.
I guess the original concept for these stories were a series of vignettes or like short stories telling just a fragment of like the tale of the end of a great civilization. And I wrote this like 9 short stories that were that, and they were like very disparate, quite nondescript, big civilizations that were coming to their end. And I called these 9 stories the Dead City Lullabies, and I thought that was a nice title. And this is like one of them, and
Cool.
it's like it's the satisfying story arc within the context of something that I may not tell explicitly, but you will be able to piece together from what you get from this book of the big, the, the end of this civilization. And it's not necessarily a very bleak thing. It's sort of like the renewal of things, I guess, is the philosophical
Interesting. That's a really interesting
lens that you're looking at this from.
Wow. Okay, that's piqued my interest even more about this story, because I have my suspicions of like who the character is at the very beginning of the story, which, by the way, is one of my favorite parts of this story. Is the way you've drawn that sequence is phenomenal. But I guess to kind of
Thank you. So that's the clue.
yeah.
Those 10 pages are the clue to the wider picture.
Oh.
Fantastic. I do apologise. My mum has just started the quad bike. If you can hear a slight purring sound, hopefully we'll drive away soon. I live on a farm, for those who don't know. I live literally above the barn. Anyway, I guess to circle back is
Cool.
with the reason why I thought of the Lost City of Atlantis, and especially with kind of nods toward the movie, is that the color choices that you've I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't read it, but there's the page right there actually that I was in reference to, is that there's these 2 marks that appear on her neck, and that actually like reminded me and casted me back to when I was like under the age of 10 and I was watching that movie Lost City of Atlantis, and she's got the necklace that floats, and it's a key to unlock the city, and it's exactly the same color. And I was just like, oh, I have to read the entire story to know whether or not it's similar in some way.
Really?
But yeah, I was like,
right. So I wasn't aware you were referring to a particular film.
And also
now there's a bit of a lag here.
Yeah, there is. I noticed that.
With me?
Okay, so it's about 3 seconds. It was about 12 seconds, so we're getting better.
Oh dear. Apologies.
I'll say something, and then
hopefully I do have a tendency of speaking quite fast, so I'll try and slow down. I'd like to chalk it up that it's just my excitement, but yeah. I guess moving into I guess also it kind of comes back to the mech designs as well. That's another notion that I kind of saw a similarity between the Lost City of Atlantis as well. But all of that aside, I found you through as a judge on the CAA Awards. I would really love to talk more about your experience going through such a big award ceremony. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was so cool. This is my first comic book. So I really feel like, a newcomer to the scene. Although I've been working on this for a very long time, I was just thinking to myself, how do we get this out there, like to like-minded peeps? And I thought, and I knew of the ledgers and the CAAs, and I thought, well, look, I'll like put it up for consideration for that, see if I get a bite. And then, fast forward to Gary contacting me and saying, you've actually won one of the awards. I can't tell you which, but I just wanted to tell you in case you were able to make the ceremony, which is in Adelaide, where Sheydin is. And I said, yeah, I will. Absolutely. I'll fly there. We'll spend the money. We'll do it. And so to take home the gold ledger for my first, the first chapter of my first book, I suffered a bit of imposter syndrome going into that room. But I was like, yeah, hi, I'm Aidan, and I was like, my book's Dead City Lullabies, and people are like, yeah, I know it. I was like, wow. So I was really, I was super, super humbled and delighted by the attention that it got, and just the response. And Sheydin, I remember you came up to me at the bar. You're like, I just wanted to say, I bloody loved it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, shit, I must be doing something right. And I'm familiar with your work, Sheydin, too, which is phenomenal. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm talking to the right crowd. Like these people, I guess, get where it's coming from, and that's so beautiful, and was really inspiring. And so I took home this trophy, and I was like, yeah, I won the gold ledger. Shit, so I better like make that second volume happen. And yeah, it was. It's so generous what the Comic Arts Awards of Australia do, and way back in time to when it was originally called the Ledgers. What that team have done purely just for recognition and celebration of Australian comic work is like really, it's really generous and really lovely, and I don't take any of that for granted. And I really love the legacy stuff they do every year, and I think you can learn a lot from just paying attention to what it's almost like a repository of almost like the Library of Congress for Aussie comics, so yeah, I was very, very honoured. It was so lovely. It's on my piano. The award takes pride of place there.
Good.
That's awesome.
I'm glad it's front and center in the household. I guess, yeah, big shout out to Gary, who organised last year's event. I think it was super amazing to have it.
That was his last, I believe.
It was,
Yeah.
and for those who didn't attend or didn't watch the live stream, Gary actually went home with a very handmade award to thank him for his contribution to the comics community. I think he's been doing it for quite a while. But yeah, it was lovely to meet. It was a room full of creativity that night, and it was fantastic to see everyone. Also, shout out to Spedsy, who is a co-creator on this channel, who does the drink and draw. That was the first night I met Spedsy in person, so that was pretty fantastic, pretty phenomenal to sit next to him, having met him online, and then obviously yourself as well. It was really nice just to put faces to the creations that night. It was a really spectacular event, and then obviously was followed up by Paper Cuts, the comics festival here in Adelaide.
I was so bummed I couldn't make that.
Oh, next time. It was just tied so well together, and I think a lot of Adelaide creators were really proud of how the festival kind of worked that week. So yeah, it was just really awesome to see a real buzz of creativity here in Adelaide, I guess. So yeah, again, like, congratulations, Aidan. I think that was a really well deserved for you. And yeah,
thank you, mate.
what an entry into the industry as well. I think definitely it's very commendable and very admirable.
Yeah, thank you, man. Like it's I'm humbled and yeah, it's like I feel like it's rolling now, and that was like the boost of confidence I needed too. But yeah, it's just so lovely. I just wanted to mention there's been some very lovely discussion in the chat. I'm not sure how to respond to it, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but
Absolutely.
do you want me to address one or two of those things?
If you want to. Totally up to you.
There's just one that just popped out. But sure, so is it Sean Chai Dorcha? I'm not sure how I pronounce that.
Which one?
Sean Chai. Are the landscapes real places? If not, how do you keep them consistent? Which is a really cool question.
Yeah.
There we go. A great question. No, they're not real places, and um, I guess it's easy to keep them consistent in the setting of this chapter because it's a canyon in the middle of a vast desert. So I just had to build up my chops of creating rock formations, and um, but I did have to, for certain scenes where a lot of stuff sort of happens in the same place. I obviously had to map it out a bit. Um, so where that machine is lying, there's some sort of formations and stuff that if I'm drawing from the opposite camera angle, I had to say, well, I've got to include that because people who are really paying attention and the cinematographers out there and stuff will go, where's that rock formation gone? So continuity is just that other thing you have to think about
Yeah.
when you're drawing something like this. It's like, so the city too. I mean, the stuff you're seeing in the prologue there is all like just tiny little Kodachrome snapshots, I guess. But eventually, when you are in a city environment, I'm gonna have to have I might have to do a SketchUp model of the whole thing, so so I know where I am and what I have to draw. Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah,
that'd be
that's a
awesome.
question.
It's funny that you brought that up as well, because that's actually a technique that I used when modeling my own town in my comic. I actually 3D modeled it, so I knew where all the territories were.
This
And
is No Man's Land.
yes, it is. And might I say, it is a great
Mm.
technique, because then you can really immerse yourself in.
It's so it
Yeah. Oh, did we lose him again?
totally.
There.
Yeah, I mean anything like that, like even if you had like Jenga blocks or something that you photographed, that can serve the same purpose. Just to say your point of reference is consistent.
Yes.
I can still hear you, but did you lose me?
You
Yeah,
come
you
in and
froze for a second.
Okay, but
that's a
you got me again. Yeah,
I guess kind of
sorry about
moving
that.
on. No, not it's technology. Can't
Yeah,
help
you gotta
that.
love it.
We live in a big country as well, so the internet
No,
sometimes struggles in Australia. I guess moving into some of our tail end questions, just to round out tonight's amazing interview, I would really like to get to know a little bit of what you think of the comic industry. We have already touched on the CAA awards, but I kind of want to get more of an idea from you. And this is some of my favorite questions to ask on the show as well. But first and foremost, I want to ask is you mentioned that Dead City Lullabies 2 is on the horizon. Are there any other projects that you're working on outside of comics or within comics at all?
I certainly do commission stuff and the occasional job for something like, storyboards for an ad or like a album cover for someone or that sort of stuff. There's always like something boiling away, which is nice. But one of the things that is slowing down the completion of volume 2 is I'm working on a book for my daughter for Christmas, which is an adaptation of, oh, here we go. I gave Shane some pictures earlier.
Yeah.
An adaptation of E.T. the Extraterrestrial in storybook form for her. Why did that come about? Because I had the vinyl soundtrack next to my player one day, and she said, "What's the Moon record, Daddy?" It was on the back, and it's got the Elliot on his bike in front of the moon with E.T. I said, "Oh, that's from a movie called E.T. It's very beautiful music." And she said, "What's E.T.?" I said, "Well, it's a story about a little boy who meets a little alien who's lost, and he has to help him get back to his spaceship, and they become best friends." And she's like, "I need to know more about this immediately." I thought, well, it's from when Daddy was a kid, this movie was like the biggest thing, and it's just such a wonderful story. And she became completely enthralled with it, primarily through John Williams's music. And I would say, okay, this is when the men are like chasing him through the forest, and this is where they, E.T., makes the bike fly, and he's feeling sick now, and time's running out, and this whole thing where we listen to the soundtrack, and her imagination was so sparked by it, and all of the play we've been doing often centers around E.T., Elliot, and the family, and the men chasing him, and like so it's become this like the center of our lives again. So like 40 years later, suddenly I'm thinking about this story all the time, but I can't let her watch it because those of you who remember the film, like it's like so magical, but there is some stuff that's a little bit strong in it, and way too strong for her. So I thought, what if I could give her something in the interim that does the same thing as that film, and I can
Absolutely.
leave some stuff out of it and reshape it a little bit just so it's a bit more age appropriate. So I thought,
Yeah.
well, I'll do a story book. So it's a kid's book version of ET, and it's about 80% there. I need to finish it to give it to her at Christmas time.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No.
there's some sort of in progress shots. So it's just a little family project, but it's become like a big thing. And my publisher, Tim from Wild North Comics, when he's like, so what's this ET thing you're talking about? I was like, oh, well, this. He's like, oh, can we publish it? Like, can we like make it a whole thing? And I was like, it's a great idea. But I mean, you could probably see some similarities with the color work and stuff, the way I approach it to Dead City
Yeah.
Lullabies. So it's a way of keeping my chops flowing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just been really wonderful. So stay tuned. I will be able to give people copies of it probably on a pre-order basis when it's done.
Oh,
But
phenomenal.
it's not licensed by Universal Pictures or anything, so it's a
Yeah.
fan project. Anyway,
That's amazing.
so that's
Yeah, what a fantastic family project. I think that's really heartwarming as well. I'm sure she'll be over the moon come Christmas. Or I would
so
be.
to speak.
Literally.
So to speak.
I'm
Yeah,
so glad.
and so like, but I'm not letting it stall Dead City Lullabies.
Yeah.
I'm still chipping away at that, but it's slowed it down a little bit. But early next year we'll have volume 2, I promise.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait. I'm super, super excited. I guess you've been like so busy with all these projects happening. I personally like to ask this question to artists in particular, and I'm sure we've got many artists watching tonight. And that's how you overcome creative block. I know as artists, we all kind of experience it in one form or another. And I'd really like to hear your insight in how you overcome it.
Well, I guess I'm so with Dead City Lullabies. I suffered a fair bit of writer's block with it. But I managed to free that up. I did a lot of study and I did a lot of like methodology stuff that helped like free up the ideas. And so once I got a really satisfying arc mapped out in amongst this like massive universe I was trying to create that didn't have time for, I managed to distill it into this, and I was so excited that it was enough to like get the drawings just like spilling out for a while. And this was during COVID when when we were locked down, and I was like, well, when I'm not working, on my computer, I guess at least I've got that to do. And it was always like my even though it was sometimes hard, every day I would say, listen, if you can just make a couple of marks on the page, you've gone some of the way there. And it was just trying to discipline myself enough to at least make a few marks. And more often than not, that would then spill onto like 3 pages. I'd get 3 pages done in this like whole late night session. I'd be like, wow, I got heaps done. And so just the very doing of it is, even if I'm really not in the mood, it's like I'm not in the mood to go there, I'll try and force myself to, because it does free me up. Because I need to just trust in that I've got it sitting there. It's going to come out. You just need to, it's like going to yoga class or whatever. It's like, I'm not up for it today, but I'm going to feel better afterwards. So let's do it.
Yeah.
That's I've had to have that sort of, work day approach to it. Otherwise, because if it just, I could just like let it go, but I'm not that kind of person. I need to like get through the like swamp. If you're not feeling it, you've got to find a way through, because there will be the other side when you're feeling better about it. I guess, I don't know. It's a pretty vague answer, but
No, I think
that's
everybody's got their own answer to it, and it's always interesting to hear everybody's different approaches to it. So whatever works for yourself might actually work for another person. They just haven't found it yet. So I always really enjoy asking those questions, because then a viewer can actually take something from it and find an amazing artist while they're at it.
yeah.
I want to also point out, I think we've got some more questions coming through on the chat. I just wanted, now I should know this because I was a judge last year, but when is the Comic Art Awards this year? Does anybody know?
I've
I know
actually
they're in
been wondering
Canberra.
about myself.
I know they're in Canberra, and I'm pretty sure late November, but
I
don't
think
quote
that's
me.
what you said. Yeah. I do believe that if you type in to Google, it should come up. I do believe they also have an Instagram account where you can find that information. I do apologize. I was not pre-prepared to know this information. I should know this information. Were there any other questions that we missed? I believe William asked, just got here, liking it already. When is the Kickstarter?
Well, the
Did you wanna-
Kickstarter happened at the beginning of this year.
Yeah.
So that's what's enabled it to become the book and the record, because the Kickstarter was very successful. So I was able to properly get them done. So whether or not there's a Kickstarter for the second volume, it's a matter for me and my publisher to decide. But yeah, if there is, it'll be less of a Kickstarter than like funding the printing, you know.
Yeah.
This was a very elaborate Kickstarter that we ran, and lots of rewards that I'm still getting through, including some like original commission pieces and stuff. So it's a lot of work doing a Kickstarter, like so much work to do it, you know, properly. And that's time that could be spent just making the next one. So I'm not sure if we'll do a second one, but stay tuned. We might do.
Well, you cross that bridge when you get there, I guess. But still, there's a lot to look forward to, which is fantastic. I believe Joro has just put in the answer we've been all looking for, which is the 29th of November for those who want
It's
to
very
know.
late November.
Yeah, very late November. So that's really exciting. So there's a lot happening, it seems, on the comic scene. And speaking of the comic scene, I really want to know what you think the Australian comic scene really does well at, and what perhaps we could do better at.
Like I said earlier, I do feel like the new kid on the block in the comics scene, for sure. So like, because I haven't my engagement with the comics world at large has been specific and sporadic throughout my life. I'm not like a comic collector, and I'm not really into all the big properties like the Marvels and the DCs so much, although I love Batman. So I feel like a little bit of an outsider. However, the people I've met since getting Dead City Lullabies out there, and the artists I've met and the writers I've met have enlightened me to like this whole community of superbly talented storytellers and artists that I'm really excited to get to know and collaborate with, and like have this like whole journey with. Because I feel like, although I'm getting old, it's like I feel like this is the start of this whole new journey, which is so. It's just like yeah. So every con I go to and stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, I love your stuff. Like I feel like an excited kid with it. And you know, I have a few closer mates who have been doing it for many years, and I feel like there's a general feeling of it's hard to get your stuff out there. That's a thing, because there's just so much content on the internet, and there are so few comic book stores compared to when I was growing up in the 80s. So it's like it's an ocean Like people are waving, go, I've got this cool book I've done, and like people come and check it out. It's hard. It's hard to reach people, but stuff like the CAAAs and stuff like your show, guys, are the things that make the community feel like a valid and a cool thing that like is worth slowing down and listening to and paying attention and seeking out the books, and I feel like that is really healthy in Australia, well, and internationally as well. But um, like there's obviously no shortage of talent and great ideas and stories. This is, we live in such a big country with very little funding and so few people for the landmass. It can feel like a bit of a desert here to like getting your stuff noticed, but there is lots of great avenues and government grants and stuff and yeah, that is really a lot of countries would not have. So we are quite lucky. It's a cool comics community to be in, I think. I mean, these days too, like just with like this kind of stuff is global anyway. Like there's hopefully people listening, overseas right now, and so you can reach other humans everywhere. You just have to slow down and do it. Again, another sort of like ethereal answer to your question, Jaden. But I think, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to get in any of the creative industries. It's really hard to get to make connections and make your stuff sing, like in terms of reaching people. But if you have the patience and the fortitude to do it, like the rewards do come in. Yeah, I guess that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think especially as much dedication that you've put in, it does pay off. And I think you're just a great example of that. And I think it's very admirable to see your story and hear about your story tonight as well. You did touch on conventions as well as one way of getting out there.
Yeah.
Are you going to any in the future, or have you been to any recently?
Well, I did. I was at Supernova in Melbourne, and also Supernova in Sydney. We had a table, a Wild North Comics table, and in Sydney, because we finally had the nice glossy books and stuff, I did a bit of an Aidan Roberts table. So I had all my original art and obviously the book and Wild North Comics stuff, and it was like the foot traffic alone at a con for people who stop and go, oh, this is cool, I like this, opens up a conversation, and you meet all these people and you learn all these things, and you make connections and you meet some of your heroes. It's really cool. And there was a really sweet little one in Ashfield in Sydney recently, at Ashfield Library. It was I can't remember the name. They've all got this similar sounding names, these conventions. But it was really beautifully run. It's very small, and they had a sort of market hall and artist alley and stuff. And I finally met Nicola Scott, who I'm a big fan of.
Cool.
She was really cool, and like seeing her stuff, I was like, I've been wanting to see her stuff, physically for ages. She's like, oh, well, look, I've got some of the big ones here, and check this out. And I was thinking to myself as I was looking at her stuff, I was like, wow, I've been reading her stuff for 10 years. Now we're just like hanging out in Ashfield Library, like nerding out about line weights and stuff and different kinds of inks and whatever. And I thought, this is just like so lovely. Like, this is where I want to be with this. And just gradually making those little connections. And yeah, so cons are where it's at for like feeling inspired and meeting people.
Yes, well said.
Agreed.
And I think when you said it's like the small one really was quite nice, a nice experience for you. I would second that, because I personally find that the smaller conventions that are tailored towards comics and specifically, or other niches, is really great. Sometimes more so than the bigger conventions, because those people are actually coming for that specific reason. So they'll be combing those aisles a little bit more thoroughly than, say, at the bigger conventions where there's a lot more attractions. I really, whenever I'm talking to people who are thinking about getting into comics and whatnot here in Adelaide, friends and family, I always tell them it's the smaller conventions that I have a lot more fun at, and I meet a lot more people at. Funnily enough, and having said that, I really wish that somebody had kind of told me about those smaller conventions and how powerful they can be. I really want to ask this question to you, and that is, what do you wish someone had told you before you started your comic journey?
That's a really good question.
I like this question.
Because I want to answer it. I don't want to just waffle vaguely. What do I wish someone had told me? Learn anatomy sooner.
Yep, I agree.
The reason being, and I only sort of had a general understanding of what the human body looks like and how it moves, and animals as well, but particularly people, because that's what we most easily connect with when we're looking at artwork, because it's the most familiar thing, I suppose, is the subtleties of how a body moves and how muscles stretch and how and body language and all that sort of stuff can't just happen. You have to pay attention to it and go, oh, that's really interesting, that how neck muscles will do that when a certain under threat or whatever. All those sorts of things, I never realized, oh my God, I'm going to have to consider all that if I'm going to be successful at what I'm trying to do. So I did a really deep dive for a few years, and that paid off so hard. Like now I know how to draw a person falling off a ladder if I have to. That was just the most, and it is kind of, it's not boring, but it is like, it's a fundamental. And that's one of the things I wish someone had said, you should do this now when you're like 16 and get really good at this now and get this bit out of the way. But yeah, I feel like I'm, always still learning. Everyone's always still learning. But but can I just briefly add on to that? Something someone once said to me that I never forgot.
Yes.
Is actually my high school art teacher. Her name's Lisa Slade. And Sheydin, she's one of the gallery directors at Gallery SA now. And I saw her when I was on, and I went and visited her at the gallery because she somehow found out I was in town. We hadn't seen each other for many, many years. And I went and saw her the next day after the CAAA Awards. And she took me on this tour with the young kids that she was like showing around the gallery and like telling them, giving them tips on how to talk about artworks and stuff. They were going to be like, tour guides and stuff. And she's like, this is Aidan. I taught him before most of you were born. And I hope he learns at least something from me. And when she said that, I was like, no, I learned the most valuable thing from you. And that was, she's like, you have to not be afraid to fail. You have to like embrace failing at something because it teaches you something. This is when I was frustrated. I was like, I can't make this like pastel drawing work or whatever. She's like, just let it happen. Let it look shit. It doesn't matter. I remember she said that to me. I was like, okay. And then she's like, it may still be shit tomorrow, but you may actually, when you divorce yourself from it, come back and go, oh, now I know why that looks shit. And I'm excited to try again. I remember her saying that. I've applied that to almost everything I've done since.
That's really cool.
So, she was my Mr. Holland, if you will. Like that high school teacher that like just like put that little spark in you. Anyway.
What a wonderful story as well. And it's funny that of all the places you met her here in Adelaide, and there's a saying here in Adelaide, because we are such a small city, most likely on a day-to-day basis, if you're in the CBD, you'll run into someone that you know, or your friend knows, your cousin knows, or whatever. And we always say, Adelaide, am I right? Kind of thing. And that just goes to show, Adelaide, am I right? Of all places that you meet your high school teacher,
Yeah,
that's just crazy. Yeah, that's phenomenal that
yeah,
you cross paths with her all these years later. What a
yeah. And so shout out to Lisa. She's a really wonderful human. Um, yeah, very infectious like person, and just like, yeah, it gave me that little spark to like, it's okay. It's okay to screw up. It's like worth screwing up because that makes you, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Yeah, yeah. That was a little shout out to one of our regular guests who come up on the Drink and Draw shows, Nick May. He is also a teacher. And my best friend, Emma, shout out to you.
So's my wife.
Oh, there you go. Teachers are the best people. So
Yeah.
shout out to all the teachers out there. I think you guys are doing amazing, especially now that it's crunch time and we're heading towards the end of the year. I can only imagine how hectic it was for everyone. But I guess that's kind of gotten a last question of the night. And that is, you've talked a little bit about your Kickstarter and how it was completed earlier this year. So where can we find your work, Dead City Lullabies? Do you want to give us a spiel of where?
Yeah. Yes. Please go to my Substack, which is deadcitylullabies.substack.com. And that is sort of like the repository for all things surrounding the story and the artwork and the whole tale of how this thing began. So it's a really good place to. It's like, I call it like my Blu-ray extra, the Substack. It's like where you go to like really dig into it. I used to have Volume 1 up as a free download before the winning the Ledger Award and then being published by Wild North. So it's no longer available for free, but you can buy the book from Wild North Comics. So just Google all this. Dead City Lullabies Substack. Google Wild North Comics. Check out all the other cool stuff on Wild North as well. So you can get the book. You can also buy it digitally. And the record, you'll also be able to buy from Bandcamp, from Wild North website. It's not yet on Spotify and all that stuff. It's only on Bandcamp presently. That's because life is very busy and I've got to get around to doing all the stuff. But you'll be able to stream it pretty soon on, Spotify and Apple and that whole thing.
That's awesome.
So have a listen to that too, because that's a whole other conversation, like my musical world. Just have a listen to that on Bandcamp and please let me know what you think. But yeah, start with the Substack and I will, although it's been a little slow lately, that is where I'll do all the big announcements and like the world building stuff and little behind the scenes things. And so yeah, keep an eye on that. And yeah, please, thank you everyone for your patience for part 2. I know it seems quite absurd, like comic issues being more than a year apart, but because it's a one-man show, it just takes a long time. So yeah. It'll be with you.
As a dad as well, you're on your toes constantly.
I tell you what, yeah, that's a whole other hour-long conversation.
I can only imagine. Yes, I can only imagine how busy it must be juggling all of those things at once. But otherwise, Aidan, a huge congratulations again. A year on, you've done a phenomenal job, and what a start to what I'm sure is going to be a very successful comic journey for you. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on tonight. It's been phenomenal to talk everything Dead City Lullabies. yeah, I don't know. Did you want to end with anything else, Shane? Any reminders for
Oh,
upcoming shows or
Oh,
yourself, Aidan?
yeah, I just want to say thank you, Sheydin. It's lovely to chat to you. I'm sure we'll get a chance to do more of that in the coming times. And Shane, thanks again for pulling it all together, man.
pleasure.
Um, and Sheydin, I believe you've got No Man's Land back in stock, so I'll be getting a copy from you. Uh,
Please, yes.
I'll be ordering one of those. Check out
I'll
her
be-
work if you guys aren't familiar with her, but I'm sure you are.
I love this
Oh,
cross promotion, but the show is about you. But
that'd
thank
be
you.
nice.
I appreciate
All right.
it.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.
Any other
And thank
reminders?
you, I just wanted to say thank you to all the people in the chat. There's been some really nice little comments and questions and stuff. I'm reading all those. It's really nice. Thank you.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think it's been a really good night of interaction, which is fantastic. But yeah, any other reminders for upcoming shows to this week, Shane?
The main thing I want to say is if you're watching, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're watching from one of the other places, come over to YouTube and subscribe. That would be awesome. It's ComXNetAU. The show that we've got later this week, which is feels like it's later, but it's actually just 2 days away. Friday night is Drink and Draw. We've got Speedball Penance. Send in your art. It's comex.show/art. Send in your art. We want it early because I'm still getting my head around this new platform. So the later the pictures come in, the more difficult it is for me. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say. And thank you very much for Aidan for coming on the show.
Awesome.
Thank you, Sis. Thank you, Sheydin. Thanks,
Not a problem at
everyone.
all. We'll see everyone in 2 weeks' time. Until then,
I'm going to try something new.
yay!